This is Logan Thomas, tight end for the Washington Commanders, and you're listening to the Best Bell Fantasy Podcast.
Welcome into the Best Bell Fantasy Podcast. I'm Bradley Stalder. Tonight, it's Tuesday night. I know it's waivers, but we're going to look forward to week 2 after reflecting on week 1, looking at some of the biggest upside plays. And yes, my hair is crazy, but not so much many of the upside plays. As Mike Clay tweeted out earlier, this was actually a disappointing week for scoring across the board. So there are not going to be a lot of 100 percentile or above plays from this past week. But before we get into it, I just want to thank everyone for following along with me. Check out my work on fantasy data. I will be posting an article every week. That'll be live on Friday, where I will be identifying some of the players that I am higher versus the expert consensus ranking, lower versus expert consensus ranking, and I'll have some guests on as we get further into the season. As a recap, you can check out my video that I posted on Fantasy Data. You can also check out the individual player takes. They're only about a minute or two long, so check them out on Fantasy Data. And then I also want to shout out Top Prop Fantasy. I wrote a couple blurbs about their app as well. Use the promo code BEST on Top Prop, and that will support the show. It'll also get you into playing one of the easiest prop fantasy games out there, Top Prop Fantasy. And check out my article that comes out weekly on Friday for Top Prop Fantasy. Well, let's get into it. We'll start with the quarterbacks. And the number one quarterback from the week, Patrick Mahomes, 34.9 fantasy points. That is an 87th percentile outcome for Patrick Mahomes. All of his wide receivers were healthy. We saw a little bit of Marquez Valdes-Scantling. We saw a lot of Travis Kelce, and we'll see when we get to Travis Kelce in the tight end column how well he did. Obviously, tight end winner overall for the week, but stacking Mahomes and Kelce was definitely worth it for week 1. Patrick Mahomes he's a solid quarterback 1 moving forward. It was a bit above where you want him to be for a consistency. However, an 87th percentile week 1 finish, that's pretty good. And that percentile is ranked compared to the last 3 seasons worth of games played. Okay, the quarterback 2 on the week, Josh Allen, 31.48 fantasy points, 79th percentile outcome. So this was actually a lot closer. This was within one standard deviation of Josh Allen's being the quarterback 2. And so we once again, we can expect Josh Allen to be rushing the ball and passing at a high volume to Stephon Diggs and Gabriel Davis. We saw 22% target share going to Jamison Crowder and Isaiah McKenzie combined. And so looking at those players, you're going to get a lot of targets. And what was surprising from this matchup, though, and we'll hit on that in a little bit, is Zach Moss getting involved in the passing game. However, it's going to be business as usual for Josh Allen. That is a normal expected upside. Hey, Jose, thanks for tuning in. Appreciate you tuning in. And this is, as I mentioned at the top of the podcast, an upside review. So I'm going to hit on a few other players that stick out to me percentile wise. So let's look at, for instance, Justin Herbert. Herbert finishes the quarterback 5 with 23 fantasy points. It felt disappointing, but it really wasn't. I mean, this is what we should expect from Justin Herbert. A 59th percentile outcome at 23 fantasy points. That's within plus or minus 10 percentile. That's like quarterback 5 is where I had him ranked for this week, and it came out perfectly that way. Same thing with Jalen Hurts. I had him at the quarterback 4 position, but the difference between Jalen Hurts and Justin Herbert is Herbert has been regularly doing this top 5 business for the last year plus. Jalen Hurts, however, he's been more of that back-end quarterback one. This was a really encouraging performance to see some higher-end upside from Jalen Hurts, an 80th percentile outcome this week. Okay, moving forward, again, business as usual for Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray finished as the quarterback 7 this week, 48th percentile. This was actually a little below, and I think that there are concerns. Like, the Chiefs exposed Kyler Murray and the rest of the Arizona offense without DeAndre Hopkins, without Rondell Moore, a limited Zach Ertz. Like, he's just not efficient. And so you're leaning on the likes of Marquise Brown, but Brown didn't get a lot of targets, which was mind-boggling to me. It was a Greg Dortch show. And if we look at the wide receivers, Greg Dortch doesn't even register. Like, for real. Greg Dortch finished with 9.8 half PPR fantasy points, wide receiver 34 on the week. This was his highest wide receiver finish over the last 3 years. So I think that better days are ahead for Kyler Murray. If you drafted him, this is a normal outcome. You shouldn't be disappointed with his final results, but it definitely should make you feel a little bit like until DeAndre Hopkins and Rondell Moore get back, this is probably where Kyler Murray is going to settle, in this like 9 to 7 range, okay, until more weapons arrive in Arizona. Okay. Looking at some other ones, Marcus Mariota, 83rd percentile outcome. This is good. And I was in on Mariota. He was one of my highest drafted super flex underdog quarterbacks, especially pre-NFL draft, when we didn't know where he was going to be, but he was probably going to be a starter somewhere. And then he latches on to Atlanta, where you have Kyle Pitts, you have Drake London, Cordarrelle Patterson could move the ball on the ground. There are good pieces in this Atlanta offense that Mariota can get to. And we saw that aside from a couple errors that Mariota made, this is kind of the upside. So this was an upside week. I don't think we can bank on Mariota getting up to 19.8 fantasy points, probably in the 14 to 15 range. So quarterback 17 to 22 is where I would expect Marcus Mariota. But this is encouraging that you could at least see one of an upside play given the addition of Drake and Pitts. Okay. Let's look at a few others that stand out to me. Okay, let's talk about some of the underperformers. Tom Brady, 12th percentile outcome. Brady finished with 10 fantasy points. Chris Godwin left injured. Mike Evans was dealing with something during the game. Leonard Fournette hobbled off at the end. Russell Gage was questionable coming into this game. He doesn't have Rob Gronkowski. Cameron Brate is not a thing. Quarterback 27 is not business as usual for Tom Brady, but you should be concerned of him accessing this upper percentile, this quarterback 7 or higher, without other weapons. Yes, Julio Jones was targeted, and there were a couple manufactured touches for Julio, but I am concerned that Tom Brady is not going to be an upside play, at least over the next few weeks, with his we don't know how long Godwin's going to be out, but it seems like a significant hamstring injury that's going to limit him for quite some time. And unless the Tampa Bay Buccaneers bring in any other wide receivers, I think that Tom Brady is relegated to this awkward quarterback 10 to quarterback 15 range until we see some recovery. That's the reality of the offense. I mean, they played against Dallas, and you have to head into Dallas. Dallas played very well defensively for a long time, despite the offense's struggles. And we'll get to Dallas in just a second because there are a few players who fall into this downside trend. But I think we do have to temper expectations of achieving a ceiling for Tom Brady moving forward. Okay, a couple other duds. Matthew Stafford, 7th percentile. Facing the Bills, I think it's going to get back to business as usual. But I've had Stafford in that 13, 14, 15 range preseason. And I think he's going to stay there. Like, we need to see it from Allen Robinson before we can say, hey, you have Cooper Kupp, you have Allen Robinson. And yes, you can say, well, they face the Bills, but you should expect a Rams offense to scheme around this defense. But there are some flaws in the Rams. Their pass protection struggled badly. Their offensive line just couldn't get it going. Cam Akers missed, even in the limited snaps that Cam Akers had, he missed a block that led to a Stafford sack, and that just stifles downfield plays. And so I do think, once again, better days are ahead for Matthew Stafford. This was a 7th percentile outcome score over the last 3 years, but I'm not encouraged by upside. And Dak Prescott, obviously a 4%, 4th percentile outcome this past week, quarterback 31. Aaron Rodgers, quarterback 32 on the week. This was bad. If you read my article on Fantasy Data, I wrote about how there were a lot of warning signs going into week 1 that Aaron Rodgers was not going to perform. And if you want to check out my Aaron Rodgers video, go to Fantasy Data's YouTube channel, and you can find the Aaron Rodgers video that I uploaded there. Okay. And this is the biggest red flag, is Aaron Rodgers, 3.7 half-point PPR points. And not that for quarterbacks it really matters, the half point. But as we get into the other positional players, I'll be operating in the half-point scoring system, and 3.6 percentile. Like, this was arguably his worst game for fantasy over the last 3 seasons. So, yes, I don't think he's going to be quarterback 32. Like, this is a regression in the mean scenario. However, I don't even know if he can get top 12 anymore. You don't have Devontae Adams. I know that you've got Aaron Jones, but Aaron Jones was out carried by A.J. Dillon, and A.J. Dillon was catching the ball too. So we'll talk about the Packers offensive players here in just a bit. But if you were thinking, oh, I'm going to get cheap stacks of Aaron Rodgers and Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs, and no, that's not going to be a thing this year. Like, Christian Watson missed an 80-yard touchdown. I mean, even if that happens, that's a 14.5-point game. Christian Watson runs a lot of routes, but you know that if for Aaron Rodgers, it's about trust, and dropping a pass like that in such a critical time, first play of the game, that's going to reverberate throughout this beginning of the season. So Aaron Rodgers and the Packers need to show me upside before he makes it into my starting lineup anytime soon. This is a major, major red flag, and there is teeth to it. It's not like last year. A lot of people are saying, oh, it's New Orleans. Oh, Jameis Winston threw 5 touchdowns against the Packers and they still had a great record, blah, blah, blah. It is within the range of outcomes that the Packers are legit bad this year. So, yes, I think better days are ahead for Aaron Rodgers. However, I think his ceiling is quarterback 13, 14. He can't access top 12 moving forward. Okay, let's move on. We've talked enough about quarterbacks. Let's get into the running backs. The top running back for the week, Saquon Barkley, 30.4 half PPR points. That was a 93rd percentile outcome for Saquon Barkley. And we saw spike weeks from Barkley. We saw 90-plus percentile outcome from DeAndre Swift and Cordarrelle Patterson. All 3 of those running backs finished in the top 4 in half PPR. Jonathan Taylor, who finished second Actually, this was an 80th percentile outcome for Jonathan Taylor over the last 3 seasons, although Taylor's only played 2 other seasons. So 2020 and beyond in that sample, this would be an 80th percentile outcome for Jonathan Taylor. This is a more reasonable expectation. This is what you drafted Jonathan Taylor for. He still has more ceiling to go. But this is encouraging. You like seeing Jonathan Taylor be the number 2 running back overall. A couple 100 percentile outcomes. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who finished running back 6, and Dontrell Hilliard finished running back 7. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, this was extremely encouraging. He played majority of snaps until the game was in hand. He played he rushed the majority. Jerick McKinnon was obviously there for third downs. McKinnon ended up finishing as the running back 42. His ECR, his expert consensus ranking, I think was in the late 50s, and I moved him up into the mid 40s. So that was a good call on Jerick McKinnon. That was a 67th percentile outcome for McKinnon. And then, of course, Isaiah Pacheco got on the board. Pacheco finishes the running back 21 on the week in half PPR. Okay, a few others. A.J. Dillon finished as running back 10, scored 17.6 fantasy points in half PPR, but this was an 87th percentile outcome. This was a ceiling game for A.J. Dillon. So a lot of players are like, well, he's going to get me this. He's going to split carries with Aaron Jones. He'll get the goal line work. I don't know if it's going to be Aaron Jones at the goal line next time. Like maybe it's A.J. Dillon, maybe it's Aaron Jones. I think if A.J. Dillon falls into the end zone, he's obviously a back-end running back 1, given the amount of usage he's going to get. But if A.J. Dillon doesn't run into the end zone, we're talking about a back-end running back 2, running back 3, just based on volume and the receptions. So I think there is limited upside, as I mentioned before, with the limits of Aaron Rodgers and the slow pace of play that the Packers run at and the amount of run plays that the Packers use. It's not possible for A.J. Dillon to access this top 7 without an injury to Aaron Jones. Okay, so let's talk about a few other big ones. Nick Chubb, 50th percentile outcome, running back 14. It's every day. Now you're kind of disappointed in best ball because you're hoping that Nick Chubb will give you some spike weeks. No, this is every business as usual. Running back 14 for Nick Chubb. Big disappointment on the week. Christian McCaffrey, running back 18 over the last 3 seasons in plus 20 this first week. So from 2019 on, Christian McCaffrey's 13.7 half-point PPR was an 18th percentile outcome. This was almost outside of a standard deviation bad, and he was healthy for this game. Now, is this a warning sign? Possibly. Could also be that this is game 1, and Baker wanted to. I don't know. Baker didn't throw much either. But the limiting factor for Carolina right now is the amount of plays that they get off. If Christian McCaffrey can bump up his target share a little bit and Carolina can increase the amount of plays that they run, you could see Christian McCaffrey getting back into it, into that top 5 pretty regularly. This was not a good look, though, because he was healthy and there were no other reasons other than usage and volume, like team volume, that were concerns. Another dud, Dalvin Cook, 12.3 half PPR fantasy points. The Minnesota Vikings want to attack. That's what Kevin O'Connell wants to do with this offense. Attack, attack, attack. Justin Jefferson, KJ Osborne, Adam Thielen. I know Thielen didn't have a great game, but they want to attack downfield. They want to stretch the field. When Irv Smith is healthy, Irv Smith is a player that I'm targeting, or if it's on the waiver wire, wants to just scoop up, especially if he's dropped due to the goose egg that he had. I want in on Irv Smith. Okay. A few other spike weeks that I want to mention. Rex Burkhead, 74th percentile outcome at 9.5 fantasy points. But here's the big deal. He played way ahead of Dameon Pierce. And look, Houston is trying to manufacture touches and manufacture offense. And if Rex Burkhead is going to be involved, you want pieces of this, especially on the pass plays. So Rex Burkhead, if he's somehow still on your waivers, I think he's worthy of, if in a deep bench, you pick him up. Brandon Bolden seems to be the third down back. This was an 87th percentile outcome for him over the last 3 seasons. But I think that this role is an eyebrow raise. If he's available in deep PPR leagues, that's a player. He finishes running back 24 on the week, 9.8 half point PPR points. But this could be a regular role for Brandon Bolden. A little bit of a disappointing week for Darrell Henderson, 9.8 fantasy points as well. But this is a 71st percentile outcome over the last 3 years. As long as Darrell Henderson is getting the work ahead of Cam Akers in the way that he did in week 1, we're looking at, if he falls in the end zone, we're talking about a back end running back 1, high end running back 2. If as I said, Darrell Henderson falls in the end zone. A player that I hit on, and I told you that you shouldn't have too high of expectations. Week 1, Chase Edmonds. This was a 55th percentile outcome at running back 30, 8.5 half point PPR points. So I think better days are ahead given the usage that Chase Edmonds had, the routes that he was running, the snaps he was playing. Way ahead of Raheem Mostert and any of the other backs. However, this was a week. This was a reminder that Chase Edmonds has this within his range of outcomes. And if the Miami Dolphins continue to be one of the pass heaviest, at least in rate over expectation, teams in the NFL, Chase Edmonds can have games like this where if you drafted him in a 0 RB league, hoping that he'll spike while your wide receivers spike, he may not pay off the dividends that you invested, especially if you were getting him in the 7th round. Okay, let's look at a few others. Our first single-digit percentile. Oh, and it's back-to-back. All right. The running back 45 on the week was Alvin Kamara. Running back 46, Ezekiel Elliott. Both were 9.8 and 9.4 percentile. This was widely outside of their normal bell curve. Alvin Kamara had the rib issue, which we want to explain away, but the reality is the Saints signed Latavius Murray to the practice squad just as insurance. 2, Mark Ingram's not going away. 3, Taysom Hill is still a thing at tight end. And Alvin Kamara was out there blocking a lot more than we were expecting. I think he had 11 blocking assignments during the game. So should we be worried about Alvin Kamara? I think we need to temper expectations a little bit. These single-digit percentile games are extremely unusual unless you have injuries. So Alvin Kamara has the rib issue, and Ezekiel Elliott, nothing could get going for the Dallas Cowboys, and then Dak got hurt near the end of the game, and I think the 3rd quarter, maybe the beginning of the 4th quarter. But still, Zeke was not putting it up, and Tony Pollard was splitting a lot of snaps with him. I think, the Zeke show still going forward because Tony Pollard was running back 57 on the week, and that was a 29th percentile outcome. Sure, Tony Pollard can get better, but that's still within one standard deviation of the outcomes for Tony Pollard. So I am concerned about these Dallas running backs moving forward with Dak Prescott not going to be in the lineup for at least the next 3 weeks. Seems to be the bare minimum. I've heard up to 8 weeks. I don't know what to believe at this point, but the reality is it's bad for Dallas, and it's bad for your fantasy teams. Okay. So there we go. That's our running backs a little bit. And then wide receivers. Let's look at the wide receivers. Number one, Justin Jefferson was our number one by a long shot, by almost 10 half-point PPR points. Justin Jefferson, 96th percentile outcome over the last since 2020 when he was drafted. 96th percentile outcome. But I think this could be a Cooper Kupp year. This could reset his bell curve. Do I think better days are ahead for Justin Jefferson? I think this is the best days. Like, enjoy the best days of Justin Jefferson. He's going to be heavily targeted, moved around, line of scrimmage, lots of movement pre-snap to get him into mismatches and an open space in the field. And Kirk Cousins, as I've said time and again, is a capable quarterback of getting Jefferson the ball wherever he is. Now, Cooper Kupp had an 80th percentile outcome, being just the wide receiver 2 on the week. That's pretty nice. Devontae Adams was wide receiver 3. That was a 73rd percentile outcome. That's getting closer to his 50th percentile. A few surprises here. It took Robbie Anderson a 92nd percentile to get to be wide receiver 10. Jerry Jeudy was wide receiver 11 on the week. 18.2 half-point PPR points for Jerry Jeudy. And, Jeudy had the 66-yard touchdown. That was 12 and a half points of that 18. So 2/3 of his points came on one play. That's what happens with Russell Wilson. That's what happens with Jerry Jeudy and what could happen with Courtland Sutton, right? I mean, Sutton finished as wide receiver 37 on the week. Still a 59th percentile outcome for Sutton. I think better days are ahead for Sutton. And there's plenty of upside still left for Sutton. As you can tell, this was like only a 59th, 60th percentile week for him. He didn't hit on the nuts. It was only 9.2 half-point PPR points for him. A couple other players. Michael Pittman had a 95th percentile outcome. I was big on Pittman this year. I was drafting him a lot at the 2-3 turn. One of my favorite players. If I'm going to reach on a wide receiver, it was going to be Pittman, who finished wide receiver 5, and it was A.J. Brown, who finished as wide receiver 7 this week. 76.2 percentile for A.J. Brown. We've seen this upside before, and to only be at the 76th percentile to finish as wide receiver 7, there is still room to grow for A.J. Brown, and that's scary. Okay, that's scary. His bell curve continues to go a lot further than what we saw on Sunday. A couple 100th percentiles. Got to shout out Devin Duvernay, who finishes the wide receiver 9. This was a 100th percentile outcome game for him. DeAndre Carter, 100th percentile outcome game for him. Same with Greg Dortch, Noah Brown. We see a lot of rookies clustered there, obviously being their lead. Michael Strahan had a 100th percentile week, being wide receiver 70. That was fun. But a few other wide receivers. Let me take a look. Mecole Hardman. This was a 70th percentile outcome for Mecole Hardman. We cannot expect him to. This was a 70th percentile outcome for Mecole Hardman, scoring 9 fantasy points and finishing outside the top 36. Yikes. Yeah, I'm not in on Mecole Hardman. There's not a lot of ceiling left when you're only scoring 9 fantasy points, and that's a 70th percentile outcome. Okay. Keenan Allen left the game hurt. He was crushing at the beginning. Due to the injury, is only 27th percentile. He's probably going to be out this coming Thursday. However, looking at what Palmer did, Josh Palmer only scored 2.4 fantasy points. Instead, it was DeAndre Carter who had the big week, finished top 22. All right, a few other players, team preseason calls. Dante Pettis. I had Dante Pettis as an eyebrow-raised wide receiver for the Bears. That game was a mess, but he still finishes wide receiver 28. Pettis somehow always, like, my worst dynasty trade ever involved Dante Pettis. I traded a first-round pick and Will Fuller to acquire, for the privilege of having Dante Pettis on my dynasty roster. Boy, was that a mistake. Boy, was that a mistake. Okay, couple other shout outs. Top 23 wide receiver on the week, DJ Chark. DJ Chark, 68th percentile, 13.2 PPR points. DJ Chark's percentile was lower than Mecole Hardman, but he scored more than 3 points, almost more than 4 points more than Mecole Hardman. It tells you what kind of upside DJ Chark can access. And this is a Lions team that, if anything happens to Amon-Ra St. Brown or anything happens to TJ Hawkinson, these target shares where we've seen spike weeks from can start to get condensed a little bit. And that's where it's exciting for a player like DJ Chark, who we've seen massive upside before. And we can see shootouts with a good offensive line. Jared Goff is a capable, useful quarterback. He's not going to, he did throw a pick 6 against the Lions, which cost him the game. But we have seen upside from DJ Chark before. A little bit of disappointment from Deebo Samuel, but that was, once again, the San Francisco-Chicago game, full of rain. I wonder how much more rushing Deebo Samuel is going to get with Elijah Mitchell out. Mitchell projects to miss 2 months due to the knee injury and MCL injury. All right, let's get down to our first single-digiter. And as I'm scrolling down, we see a 20th percentile outcome from DJ Moore on our way. DK Metcalf had a 17th percentile outcome. Not good. Wide receiver 66 on the week. We'll excuse Chris Godwin's 8th percentile, but that tells you what kind of upside Chris Godwin had. His 8th percentile is 5 points. Once he's back on the field and he's healthy, Godwin's going to be a main fixture of that Tampa Bay offense. Let's get down to our first legit single-digit bust, and that was Mike Williams. Williams finished as the wide receiver 102. Literally, Simi Fehoko scored more fantasy. I love Simi Fehoko, by the way. I'd love to see him get more run, everything, but Simi Fehoko scored more fantasy points than Mike Williams in week 1. Who would have thought? Williams, this is a 7.8 percentile outcome. If Keenan Allen is out, Mike Williams better be running his routes or we're going to be in a lot of trouble. So, yeah, I don't know how this offense is going to operate. Maybe it'll go through Gerald Everett, which was a nice call by me. Shout out to me on Gerald Everett. That call was really good. Okay. So a 7th percentile outcome for Mike Williams, who finished as the wide receiver 102. Another single-digiter, Allen Robinson, a 3 percentile outcome, 1.7 fantasy points. That's disgusting. Better days are ahead for Allen Robinson, but as I mentioned before, there are legitimate holes in this Rams offense that I think are going to limit the ceilings. We're going to have a couple spike weeks from Allen Robinson. But this is a scary, scary floor if the right defense matches up against the Rams. And I don't think it's just that the Bills were a tough defense. I think it's also the scheme that they were running. They were playing 2 high safeties and forcing the ball to the middle of the field. Tyler Higbee and Cooper Kupp had double-digit targets. Okay, another single-digiter, Devontae Parker, 8.9 percentile outcome. That was gross. Darnell Mooney, a 2.9 percentile. When I was doing projections for Mooney, I talked about this earlier in the offseason. I didn't see a ceiling for Mooney. He could put up wide receiver 2 numbers, but that's the best he can do. And if this is the scary floor, maybe it's the weather. Fine, throw it out. We will see. But the fact that Darnell Mooney only had one catch, yikes. Okay. That will conclude our wide receivers. And the last position we'll talk about, I mean, if you want to throw in a fullback, we can. But we're going to go into our tight end position. And Travis Kelce, obviously, tight end 1. This was an 85th percentile outcome for Travis Kelce, 22.1 half-point PPR points. Significant differentiator. This was a 5.3 differential between him and the tight end 2, O.J. Howard. O.J. Howard, this was a 100th percentile outcome. He had never had 16.8 half-point PPR fantasy outcomes 2019 until the present. So unlimited snaps, O.J. Howard, I guess, if you want to pick him up off waivers, if you're really desperate, maybe a 2 tight end league. He's not startable, though, because he only played 12 snaps. Like, he was out there just as like a goal line tight end who was lucky. I think this does temper your expectations for Brevin Jordan. Brevin Jordan finishing as the tight end 49 in the week, a singular fantasy point in half PPR. Now, you're thinking to yourself, well, what about Taysom Hill? Taysom Hill finishes the tight end 3. Yes, I would be prioritizing Taysom Hill over O.J. Howard if I had my way. Taysom Hill is going to be one of those tight ends. And I did projections for the New Orleans Saints. And I talked to my friend Billy Muzio, and I said, I'm way too high on Taysom Hill. Talk me down. And so Billy talked me down on like the volume percentage involvement in the offense, and I was still really high. Like, I cut his usage in half, and I was still really high on Taysom Hill. These are the types of games that even as a tight end, it might be very interesting. Okay. So Taysom Hill. Gerald Everett. I was in on Gerald Everett. And I think this is going to be more business as usual for Gerald Everett. I don't know if he's going to be tight end 4. This was a pretty weak tight end week. We really only saw 2 tight ends who finished as tight end, would have been tight end 1s last week. Okay. Tight end 1s last year, over the last few years. So like Kelce and Howard's points, everyone else, it kind of is just gross, right? After Gerald Everett, Will Dissly and Colby Parkinson finished 5 and 6, tight end 5 and 6, 90th and 100th percentile outcomes for those Seattle tight ends, both on either broken coverages or broken plays to get those tight ends some touchdowns. Not going to be, the regular business as usual for Dissly and Parkinson. I love rooting for Geno Smith. I don't think Geno Smith is that great of a quarterback. I think he's not bad, though. He's a respectable. He's probably a top 30 quarterback in the NFL right now. But did I say that out loud? Geno Smith, top 30 quarterback? I don't want to say it too loudly. Some people might get upset at me. But Seattle found a way to win that game. After that, Ertz, Freiermuth, Waller, Schultz. Business as usual, 7, 8, 9, 10. But that's 10.4 to 9.7. It's just a cluster. Why waste draft capital on a Zach Ertz, Pat Freiermuth? These were tight ends that I was avoiding because they just didn't have upside. You either go after Kelce or Mark Andrews, who finished with only 7.7 half-point PPR points, by the way. And this is what I was warning you about over the summer, too. Kelce was the safest floor as well. Mark Andrews, only 40% of the time, was what we would characterize as a tight end 1, right? Not just like he made it in the top 12, but like a top 6 tight end. He did not do that very often relative to Kelce. It's just that when Andrews hit, he hit a lot harder last year. I had a lot of Tyler Conklin on my teams. So if you want to just punt the tight end position, Conklin got a garbage touchdown at the end, but that's why you punt on tight ends. Conklin outscored Mark Andrews, Dallas Goedert, Tyler Higbee, even though Higbee had 11 targets. This is once again an illustration of why you punt tight end. You either draft Kelce or you just wait until the disgusting grossness of late in your drafts. Literally, Jody Fortson, tight end for the Kansas City Chiefs, 1 yard touchdown, got him 6.6 fantasy points. And that's a 71st percentile outcome for Fortson, right? If the Chiefs are in blowouts, it's Fortson who's going to play tight end in place of Kelce. Okay. All right, a couple other noticeables. Let's see if there are any singular percentiles as I scroll through here. Austin Hooper, 7th percentile. If you were banking on Austin Hooper doing something for you, he got 1.1 fantasy points. It was gross. Dawson Knox, same thing, 9th percentile. Better days are ahead for Knox in the touchdown department, but we knew the floor of the target share. We knew it coming into this season. He is Robert Tonyan. If he doesn't get the touchdowns, he's not going to get the targets. So, Robert Tonyan, by the way, finishing as the tight end 23 on the week, recovering from an ACL, only running about 40% of routes. So those are, and the other, I can't leave without talking about Mike Gesicki. You can cut Mike Gesicki. We're done with Mike Gesicki. Gesicki is dead to me until he leaves the Dolphins. Gesicki had a 9th percentile outcome with 0.6 fantasy points. 1 catch for 1 yard. 0.6. 0.6, a 9th percentile. There were only 3 tight ends this week who had single-digit percentiles. But as I said, if you wanted double-digit points from your tight end, you needed a top 8 tight end, and Travis Kelce scored 120% more than the tight end 8. More than. Once again, early tight end delivered for Kelce. Andrews did not pay off, and Pitts, oh boy. Yeah, Pitts did not do too well. He finished his tight end 35, 13th percentile outcome. And shout out to me on the Hunter Henry call. I faded Hunter Henry, one of the lowest rankers on Henry this week, a 14th percentile outcome for Henry. It's gross. It's disgusting. And that's how it's going to be, I think, moving forward. Jonnu Smith finished as the tight end 25 with 4.8 fantasy points, and that was a 56th percentile outcome for him. Better days are ahead for Henry, but not by much. Jonnu Smith is very much involved in this Patriots offense. So that's how it's looking moving forward. If you like what you listen to, if you want to find out more, read my fantasy data article that I'll be releasing on Friday for week 2. Check out my rankings on Fantasy Pros. I think the update will be made here shortly of how everyone did in the rankings contest. So let me see, even if they've updated. Sometimes they update it on Tuesday night. Sometimes it's Wednesday. We'll find out live. Okay. So accuracy. If it loads, we'll find out. I had some big hits. And it is not yet loaded for this week, I don't think. Let's see. Leaderboard. Yeah, it's not yet loaded. We'll see if... Okay, yeah. In the meantime, it's been a lot of fun talking about player upside, seeing their range of outcomes over the last 3 years, talking about what we can expect from these players moving forward. I know on a micro level, some fantasy analysts will take this from they ran this amount of snaps, this amount of this, and that's true. And those do factor into how I view it. But also another way in which we can look at players is how have they done historically compared to themselves. and how did they rank this week? What kind of room for ceiling do they have left? Right. Just because DJ Chark scored a couple more fantasy points than Mecole Hardman does not mean that they're the same type of player. There's a lot more ceiling for Chark, and hopefully you were drafting Chark over Mecole Hardman all offseason. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for listening. In the meantime, check out my article on fantasy data. I'll also be posting on Top Prop Fantasy this week. Look for my rankings. I'm, as of this recording, I'm still the Week 17 champion from 2021. Excited to kick off the 2022 season with you. This has been Bradley Stalder with the Upside Update of the Best Bell Fantasy Podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at FFStalder. You can slide into my DMs and ask about fantasy advice and upside plays. And good luck in the best ball streets, everyone.